One of the weakest aspects of modern American liberalism is its contempt for its opposition. You can see the roots of it in President Obama's characterization of rural America.
It's surprising them that they get bitter and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them.
And Secretary Clinton's assertion that
you could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Which she doubled down on after losing. And Bill Maher's monologue stating,
last year, Hillary Clinton said, I won the places that represent 2/3 of America's gross domestic product. I won the places that are optimistic, diverse, dynamic, moving forward. There are no red carpets in Wyoming, and no one ever asks you, who are you wearing? Because the answer is always Target. There are two Americas, and it seems like one is where all the cool jobs are, where people drive Teslas and eat artisanal ice cream. We have orchestras and theater districts and world-class shopping. We have Chef Wolfgang Puck. They have Chef Boyardee.
Yeah.
Our roofs have solar panels. Theirs have last year's Christmas light. That's why red state voters are so pissed off. They don't hate us. They want to be us. They want to go to the party. It's like we're the British royal family and they're Meghan Markle's dad.
This is not disagreement or even frustration, but naked contempt. A contempt which, during the rise of President Trump, was weaponized against them with understandable vigor. Say what you will of him, but one of the strongest aspects of President Trump's campaign was the feeling among his supporters that, flawed though he may be, at least he doesn't hold you in contempt. And while many liberals have realized that this impulse to dismiss and condescend to those who disagree with them is self-defeating and changed their ways.
And finally, new rule, you don't really love America if you hate half the people in it. Too many liberals give the impression that to them, America's just a big, ugh. The red, white, and ew. A country that started out bad and will always be bad, founded on an unrelenting history of sucking.
And in fact, many of the most popular and charismatic leaders on the left have laid this attitude aside, a smart move politically and also good for the country in general. Others have decided to double down. This resolution is well represented by David Pakman, an online liberal pundit, host of the David Pakman Show. David published a video in 2022 called Study, Trump Voters Aren't Very Smart, in which he expresses his concern for the poor, stupid Trump voter.
In his article, Cognitive Sophistication, Religion, and the Trump Vote, Shurkit examined data from 2018 and concluded there are substantial negative differences between the thinking processes and cognition of white Trump voters, as shown in the 2016 presidential election, compared to voters who supported Hillary or another candidate.
It may seem like a convenient justification for this contempt, but it's just the science, after all. He's very gracious, extolling his viewers not to laugh or mock, but rather to show compassion to those poor, unfortunate simpletons.
I mean, listen, it's really tough to have this conversation because anytime you're saying a particular group isn't as smart, it is seen as pejorative, and understandably so, and it is seen as offensive in some way, and so on and so forth. We had this instinct intuitively, that there's no doubt about that, and very early on there was data pointing in this direction. We now have some of what I would call evidence or proof, which is on average, Trump voters are less cognitively sophisticated. They are more likely to believe untruths. Look at the study. They are more likely to be literal believers of some elements from the Bible. I don't see that and laugh. Like, that's not funny to me.
I'm sure they're very grateful for your concern, David. And as you might be able to tell, I'm not really a fan of this approach, and I don't think that it's actually in good faith. But while all snobbery is grating and rude, the real question here is whether it is justified at the end of the day. So, David is citing this Salon article written by some friend of his, which is based on a survey from an atheist sociologist named Darren Shurkott.
Our friend Chauncey DeVega has an interesting article, a commentary, in Salon called New Research on Trump Voters. They're not the sharpest tools in the box. Trump's voters lack cognitive sophistication, often believe that the Bible is the literal word of God.
This study is only an application of prior research on new respondents. Shurkott presumes that religious people and conservatives are lower IQ and then connects the dots that Trump voters tended to be religious and conservative. To keep it simple, I'm only going to discuss the studies used to link religion to IQ, although Shurkott cites practically countless studies. I'm trying my best to keep it concise. Sociology has a tendency to become an infinite web of self-referential presumptions. In the words of sociologist Saskia Sassen, sociology has become too isolated from other fields of inquiry, failing to recognize the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to understanding social phenomena. It sometimes feels like a funnel, making pronouncements about meaningful things which many people from many different disciplines have commented on, and yet it only accepts other terms of art-laden studies as meaningful engagement with their hypothesis. Therefore, with anyone who might have contested their findings on philosophical grounds sufficiently iced out of legitimacy in what should be a broad comparative conversation, the discipline continues to narrow and narrow, building an internal precedent to support conclusions for which they've never even considered alternative perspectives until it becomes its own world, with its own language and its own rules and rulers. Only then, exiting from the narrow tunnel they've holed themselves into in order to make pronouncements about society, proudly wearing the mantle of objectivity. But sociology is not very well equipped to grapple with the more ethereal questions of existence, as observed by sociologist Zygmunt Bauman. Sociology has not adequately grappled with the ethical and moral dimensions of social life. The reason for this is, in the words of social critic R.L. Kolnai, the human being is not a thing and cannot be understood or explained simply by scientific method. Human beings are not observable in the same way other creatures are. Therefore, while we may attempt to empirically study ourselves as we would some chemical compound with greater or lesser degrees of success, we should keep in mind that such study is extremely limited. Sociologist Bruno Latour puts it like this: sociology has tended to prioritize quantitative methods over qualitative ones, leading to a neglect of the complexities of human experience. This is not to dismiss sociology completely. It has its place, but it is just that, a place. It runs the risk of becoming greedy and spilling into territory which is dealt with legitimately, at least, if not better, by other disciplines. Sociology is a piece of a far larger mosaic of knowledge. It should never be claimed as the basis or foundation of belief, but only as a dim insight, bogged down by human error and bias. And this is acknowledged fundamentally within the discipline. One of the fathers of sociology itself, Max Weber, said, "Sociology is not an exact science, and its predictions are always subject to error." And further, the limitations of sociology are also a result of the biases and assumptions of the researcher, which can influence the interpretation of the data. as it leaves the realm of empirical observation and wanders off into philosophical questions, it seems that a sociologist sometimes doesn't even realize he's left to the reasonable scope of his discipline. He continues to use the empirical language legitimate only for topics legitimately empirical, linguistically identical to actually empirical study. The assertions from a sociologist of this nature are nonetheless quite different in kind, and if the sociologist does not make the distinction, we must distinguish it ourselves. All of this should temper our approach to these studies as a whole, not as exclusion, but as caution. So keeping that in mind, let's examine the studies upon which the article upon which David's segment is based. Using my admittedly fallible discretion on the subject of religiosity and IQ only, Shurkott's presumptions are based on 3 studies primarily, one his own, one from Zuckerman, Silberman, and Hall, and one from Kanazawa. For the sake of time, I'll eliminate Shurkott's self-reference because, in addition to his being the least compelling in my opinion, self-reference also could imply a conflict of interest, making it the weakest of the 3. We'll start with Zuckerman, Silberman, and Hall then. In summary, the relation between intelligence and religiosity has been examined repeatedly, but so far there is no clear consensus on the direction and the magnitude of this association. There is a hint that age might moderate the relationship, but this issue has not been put to test. Finally, there is also no consensus on what might explain this relation. Most extant explanations of a negative relation share one central theme, the premise that religious beliefs are irrational, not anchored in science, not testable, and therefore unappealing to intelligent people who know better. As Birch and Pesta put it, people who are less able to acquire the capacity for critical thought may rely more heavily on comfortable belief systems that provide uncontested and uncontestable answers. Nyberg offered a similar view. High IQ people are able to curb magical, supernatural thinking and tend to deal with the uncertainties of life on a rational, critical, empirical basis. These perspectives are, in my view, so obviously acrimonious to religion as to be discrediting, frankly. It's laughable to consider such open animus as objective in any way, and to their credit, most likely because of this, Zuckerman, Silberman, and Hall treat these claims at an arm's length as well, so they continue. The present findings are correlational and cannot support any causal relation. However, 2 sets of results are consistent with the hypothesis that intelligence influences, or at least is an antecedent of, religiosity. Atheism as nonconformity. Intelligent people may be more likely to become atheists in religious societies because intelligent people tend to be nonconformist. More intelligent people are less likely to conform. They also may be less likely to accept prevailing religious dogma. Atheism as a cognitive style. The rejection of religion does not necessarily require superior cognitive skills. If one grew up in a religious community, rejecting theism probably requires a sustained cognitive effort. Intelligence may confer the ability to sustain such an effort. But why would intelligent people know better? It does not take a great deal of cognitive ability to understand that religion does not arise from scientific discourse. One does not generally hear from believers that their faith is based on fact or logic, but they continue to believe anyhow. What is it exactly about intelligent people that makes them more resistant to religion? Functional equivalence. We describe hereafter 4 functions that religion may provide. compensatory control, self-regulation, self-enhancement, and attachment. We propose that higher intelligence also provides these 4 benefits and therefore lowers one's need to be religious. Religiosity as compensatory control. Religiosity can provide a sense of external control, that is, the perception that the world is orderly and predictable, as opposed to random and chaotic. Religiosity is self-regulation. McCullough and Willoughby presented evidence that religiosity is associated, albeit weakly, with positive outcomes including well-being and academic achievement. They suggest that self-regulation, adjusting behavior in the pursuit of goals, and self-control, foregoing small, immediate rewards to increase the likelihood of obtaining larger but delayed rewards, might mediate the association between religiosity and positive outcomes. But more intelligent people have no need of this external regulation since they are able to delay gratification more easily. Religiosity is self-enhancement. High scores on the general personality factor represent high self-esteem, emotional stability, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness, all strongly positive attributes. If intelligent individuals see themselves as possessing such attributes, then they might have less need for the self-enhancement function of religion. Religiosity as attachment. Most explanations for the association between intelligence and marital status focus on the ability of intelligent people to plan more effectively, to act less impulsively, to adapt to challenges, and so on. Regardless of the mediator, if intelligent people are more likely to be married, then they may have less of a need to seek religion as a refuge from loneliness. The available data did not allow adequate consideration for the role of religion type and culture. As mentioned here and before, the articles included in this meta-analysis did not provide enough information to code religion type as a potential moderator. There was also not enough information to consider the role of culture in the intelligence-religiosity association. On a more general level, the functional approach to religion is in its infancy. In future, the list of functions is likely to be explained and the relations among functions are likely to be elaborated. It remains to be seen whether higher intelligence confers not only the functions discussed in this paper, but also functions that are yet to be discovered. In addition, the concept of functional equivalence might also be expanded to explain lower religiosity of other distinct groups who are less in need of the functions that religion provides. Finally, functional equivalence might be complemented by a concept of functional deficiency. Inasmuch as people possessing the functions that religion provides are less likely to adopt atheism, people lacking these very functions, for example the poor or the helpless, are likely to adopt theism. This is not, and nor would the authors suggest it to be, the scientific proof that religion makes you dumb, but a consideration of a broader question of cultural modes of cognition in a very limited scope interacting with religion and based on the modest available evidence, of course subject to all the limitations we previously considered. If you find any assertion contained in it compelling, it will of course not be because this paper awards you some abstract objective knowledge, but rather because it fits into a pre-existing notion you may have about the world based on your own reflection, knowledge, and experience, which of course also fair in its own right. Now, you may have something sort of akin to empirical data to support your intuition, but not proof by any reasonable standard. And again, nor would the authors of this paper suggest that. Hardly conclusive, but worth consideration. What strikes me personally is that it is not the substance of belief, but the manner in which it is embraced and understood, which is indicative of intellect. Any belief, even a true one, approached the wrong way can potentially spell the death of critical thinking after all. So what is studied here is not the truth or error of religion strictly speaking, but cultural ways in which it manifests. The second paper cited we will consider is from Satoshi Kanazawa, postulating his Savannah principle, that we have developed evolutionarily to instinctively feel according to the environment of our ancestors, not our own. General intelligence for Kanazawa is the ability to solve non-recurring problems in the environment, ones which the Savannah principle has not instinctually prepared us for. More intelligent people are better than less intelligent individuals at solving problems only if they are evolutionarily novel, but more intelligent individuals are not better than less intelligent individuals at solving evolutionarily familiar problems such as those in the domains of mating, parenting, interpersonal relationships, and wayfinding. The Savannah principle holds stronger among less intelligent individuals than among more intelligent individuals. More intelligent individuals should be better able to comprehend and deal with evolutionarily novel, but not evolutionarily familiar entities and situations than less intelligent individuals. The institutions that control, detect, and punish criminal behavior in a society today, the police, the courts, and the prisons, are all evolutionarily novel. There was very little formal third-party enforcement of norms in the ancestral environment, only second-party enforcement, victims and their kin and allies, or informal third-party enforcement, ostracism. More intelligent individuals may be more likely to acquire and espouse evolutionarily novel preferences and values than less intelligent individuals, while general intelligence may make no difference for the acquisition and espousal of evolutionarily familiar values. The Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis suggests that more intelligent individuals are more likely to seek only evolutionary novelty, not necessarily experiential novelty. Polygamy is evolutionarily familiar, whereas monogamy is evolutionarily novel. The Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis would therefore predict that more intelligent individuals are more likely to be open to monogamy and less likely to be open to polygamy. The Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis underscores the need to distinguish between evolutionary novelty and experiential novelty. It can potentially explain why more intelligent individuals are more likely to seek evolutionary novelty, but not necessarily experiential novelty. It further suggests that the established correlation between openness and intelligence may be limited to the domain of evolutionary novelty, not necessarily experiential novelty. So Kanazawa sets up this thought experiment where a lightning bolt strikes a tree and our ancestors on the savannah have to interpret the type of threat that poses. And he says that our ancestors could have made one or any threat out there in the wild. And he says that our ancestors could have made one of two errors of inference when encountering these dangers. They could have attributed random events to intentional forces when they are in fact caused by unintentional forces, which Kanazawa calls false positive or type 1, or they could have attributed them to unintentional forces when they were in fact caused by intentional forces, false negative or type 2 error. The consequences of type 1 errors were that our ancestors became unnecessarily paranoid and looked for predators and enemies where there were none. The consequences of type 2 errors were that our ancestors were attacked and killed by predators or enemies when they least suspected an attack. The consequences of committing type 2 errors are far more detrimental to survival and reproduction than the consequences of committing type 1 errors. Evolution should therefore favor psychological mechanisms which predispose their carriers to commit type 1 errors, but avoid type 2 errors and thus over-infer rather than under-infer intentions and agency behind potentially harmless phenomena caused by inanimate object. Evolutionarily speaking, speaking, it is good to be paranoid because it might save your life. Recent evolutionary psychological theories, therefore, suggest that evolutionary origins of religious beliefs in supernatural forces may stem from such an innate bias to commit type 1 errors rather than type 2 errors. The human brain may be biased to perceive intentional forces, the hands of God at work, behind a wide range of natural, physical phenomena whose exact causes are unknown. If these theories are correct, then it means that religion and religiosity have an evolutionary origin. It is evolutionarily familiar and natural to believe in God, and evolutionarily novel not to be religious. The hypothesis would therefore suggest that more intelligent individuals are more likely to be atheist than less intelligent individuals. And here, we should pause for a minute. The more interesting things about this study really are not the data it presents. The data is a very easy thing to manipulate, and while useful, ultimately the more interesting and meaningful aspects are the pre-existing conclusions upon which the data rest. As any good pollster knows, forgery or even framing can manipulate results to suit the intent of the study. Smoke up. When we critique, we shouldn't look at a conclusion, disagree, and then retroactively scrutinize the premises. We should scrutinize first. If the premises are weak, the following data is rendered weak or even completely useless. So, what premises does Kanazawa base his study on? Well, the first and most obvious is his view of history and development. In order to believe in the Savannah hypothesis, you must agree with Kanazawa on prehistory, and while his vision is reasonable enough, G.K. Chesterton reminds us that the prehistoric is too remote to be anything but a story. Even reasonable conjecture, like Kanazawa's, about the dawn of mankind will always be theoretical. Chesterton continues, the historians of prehistoric man, like the historians of the Roman Empire, are driven to gross and heartless hypotheses about the remote past through the lack of any human testimony. But that sort of science is not always a science. It is often an art. It is often merely the act of telling a good story. And a good story is not a firm foundation for any actionable knowledge, as I think even Kanazawa could acknowledge. Its contours are inherently gray. That's not a criticism, it's just something we have to sit with. Most important questions are similar. As the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard says, the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. Kanazawa would most likely consider this resignation to be a sign of intelligence because, as he says, intelligent people are more likely to be comfortable with ambiguity and able to reconcile conflicting information and ideas. They are less likely to see the world in black and white or in terms of absolute right and wrong. But if, as Kanazawa postulates, the intelligent person is comfortable with acknowledging and resting in ambiguity, and I tend to agree with him, by the way, he should acknowledge that he and his work here occupy that exact tricky, ambiguous place. I think it is worth noting also that religious people actually do acknowledge this ambiguity as well, but when it comes to theology, solve it through the admittedly supernatural virtue of faith. Religion is a lot more self-aware than Kanazawa, it seems to me, in this respect, weirdly enough, as it admits that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. They know that it is beyond our innate abilities, so they say that, like hope or charity, this belief is a gift from God. And agree with this or not, either way, Kanazawa has not caught people of faith in a conundrum. He has unwittingly, it seems, stumbled into a dialogue, philosophical and theological, which has already been happening for thousands of years, in the words of the same Soren Kierkegaard. The paradox is this: he who would know God must sacrifice his intellect to him. Which leads me not to try and tell you which perspective is right or wrong in this case, but caution against those who would presume to assert their vision in any authoritative and unambiguous tone of pure reason. When dealing with the trickier questions of life, the Christian leans on his faith and the sociologist on his notion of empiricism. Ultimately, this topic is far beyond the scope of sociology to comprehensively handle, as we've already covered. It has to lean on philosophical preconceptions, and at a certain point, of course, we all do. But if Kanazawa felt uncomfortable with acknowledging this, he would be indicting himself according to the exact same principle he uses to eschew the religious: discomfort with ambiguity. Kanazawa is wondering outside the objective limits of his discipline, which becomes hazy and weak as it enters into these first questions, such as human longing for eternity, the extent to which our nature is changeable, or how our ancestors lived. A lot of the presumptions from Kanazawa must be simply asserted and left at that so that he can continue on with his study, but really they should only be portrayed as such under the observance that this is only an assertion, a theory, not a fact. And I don't mean this as a pejorative against him. Kanazawa is an interesting and enigmatic academic, inspiring ire from all sorts of people in different times, which is often a sign of intellectual independence. This paper is actually one of his least controversial. He has bluntly theorized why Black women are the least in demand on the sexual marketplace. He has postulated that same-sex attraction is linked to higher intelligence. In 2010, he published an article called "What's Wrong with Muslims?", where he claims that half of Muslims worldwide are terrorists or active supporters of terrorism who would encourage their sons, brothers, and nephews to blow themselves up. In response to this article, Abdul El-Sayed critiqued academics are perceived to carry this weighty, objective backing of knowledge and science by the lay public, so bigoted, ignorant opinions on their parts are taken as justification to those who already hold skewed perspectives and hateful opinions. And further, the fundamental messages portrayed in the public musings of academics are no different from the crude ramblings of Glenn Beck or a Rush Limbaugh. It's a little polemical, but the point is fundamentally sound. The political pundits will dance around each other until the end of time, cherry-picking what they agree with and ignoring what they don't, while simultaneously accusing the other side of doing the exact same thing. At least they're half right. Sociology for them was never a detached attempt to observe human behavior, but a battering ram with which to confirm what they knew all along.
The simple linguistic style presented by Trump may have appealed to voters with limited education and cognitive sophistication. Of course, we suspected that.
Ultra-empirical when in agreement, utterly unscientific when otherwise.
The right wants to insist that intelligence differences exist, and of course intelligence differences do exist. It's just the right likes to insist on them along certain lines.
Sociology was, of course, never intended to be taken in either way. It is useful, but limited, almost always with some interesting insight, but almost never remotely conclusive. When Pakman badgers his audience into thinking this way, he's forcing them into a black and white moral binary of the exact sort the Trump voters are supposedly stupid because of, according to the very same standard used to inflate their sense of intelligence. He's literally dumbing them down. Irony is too weak a word for whatever the heck this is. You can't make this stuff up. All the nuance, insight, and the caveats are gone, and what remains is the clear, cold, simple, scientific, dogmatic assertion: Trump people are stupid. It's the science. What a shame. David regurgitates a select sampling of the simplest version of these complex insights to his audience, who can remain blissfully unaware In the layers and layers of filtration through which David presents this message to them, it is regurgitated from Zuckerman and Kanazawa through Shirkot, then to Salon, and finally from David into the minds of his followers, like so many eager baby birds comfort themselves in the knowledge that by listening to him, they are at least more intelligent than those awful gauche Trump people. And for David, who claims to care about the results,
I want to solve problems. And one of the things that I've said many times is when we have to argue about, this is a shorthand, dumb things, we aren't arguing about or debating or working towards solving real and complicated issues.
the results of such thinking are a closed mind, unwilling to give others any consideration. And when you don't consider other perspectives, when you give yourself excuses to think of yourself as the one who knows, well,
They are a danger. I mean, without a doubt, they are a serious danger. And they also are victims of disinformation to a degree. And as frustrating as we all realize it is to have to argue with people about, no, the vaccine doesn't magnetize you, and no, mRNA vaccines weren't rushed. It's based on a platform that allows their development to be faster.